The death of Prince Albert, the royal scandal buried beneath Buckingham Palace. When Prince Albert collapsed in December of 1861, the world was told a simple story. A sudden illness, a tragic decline, and a beloved prince consort taken too soon. But behind the carefully crafted announcement issued by Buckingham Palace, a very different narrative whispered through the gilded corridors of royal power, a narrative filled with secrecy, political motives, and a death that came at the most convenient moment imaginable. Prince Albert was only 42, healthy, active, and deeply involved in state affairs. He was more than Queen Victoria's husband. He was her most trusted advisor, her political strategist, and the man quietly shaping British policy from behind the throne. His influence was so strong that many in Parliament considered Albert, not Victoria, the true mind guiding the crown. And that made him dangerous. In the weeks before his death, Albert was locked in a fierce conflict with his own son, the future King Edward VII. The prince's reckless behavior, gambling, affairs, and a scandal involving a married woman threatened the monarchy's reputation. Albert confronted him harshly. Days later, he fell mysteriously ill. The official cause of death? Typhoid fever. But the symptoms recorded by his physicians did not match typhoid. Not even close. Witnesses described sudden weakness, intense stomach pain, and a strange discoloration in his face and lips. Modern medical historians suggest these symptoms align more closely with arsenic poisoning, a common method of silent political removal in the 19th century. And then there were the palace decisions. Within hours of Albert's death, Queen Victoria ordered the destruction of several of his private letters that reportedly contained sensitive political strategies, personal accusations, and warnings about individuals close to the throne. Why would she burn them? Even more suspicious was the man allowed to examine Albert's body. Sir William Jenner, the royal physician known for his loyalty to the crown and famous for never contradicting the palace's official narrative. No toxicology test was performed. No independent doctor was allowed near the body, and Albert was buried with unusual speed. But perhaps the most chilling clue came from Queen Victoria herself. In her private diary, written the night he died, she described Albert's passing as sudden, too sudden. I cannot write what I fear, not here. What did she fear? A conspiracy? A betrayal within her own family? Or the knowledge that the truth would destroy the monarchy she swore to protect? Part 1 ends with a question that has haunted historians for more than 160 years. Did Prince Albert really die of illness? Or was the crown protecting someone? In the days following Prince Albert's collapse, Buckingham Palace released carefully worded updates to the public. They described a man suffering a, quote, gradual decline, a fever consistent with typhoid, and symptoms that were not unexpected for the season. But the people who saw Albert behind closed doors described something else entirely. Servants whispered about the prince's rapid deterioration. One minute, he had been walking the halls, giving orders, reviewing documents. The next, he was barely able to stand. Typhoid is a slow-moving disease. It builds over weeks. Albert's condition shifted violently within hours. A footman later claimed Albert was in, quote, extreme pain, clutching his abdomen as if something burned inside him. Another attendant described his skin turning alarmingly pale, almost wax-like, with a faint bluish tinge around the lips, a sign that would make any toxicologist raise an eyebrow. Even stranger, no one else in the palace had typhoid. Not one servant, not one family member. The disease is highly contagious. Yet Albert was the sole victim. A confidential memo written by a court physician, later discovered in archives, admitted that the case was peculiar and not exhibiting the classic pattern of infection. The memo mysteriously disappeared from public records decades later. But the shadows grow darker. During Albert's final days, the Queen restricted access to his room. Only a handful of individuals, including their eldest son, Bertie, were permitted to see him. Multiple witnesses claimed the tension between father and son was still raw. Bertie had humiliated the royal family with his affair involving an actress, and Albert had confronted him only days before falling sick. Historians found letters that reveal Albert was preparing to take drastic action. He intended to recommend removing Bertie from public duties, perhaps even from the line of succession. Royal insiders knew this would create a political storm. Then, almost as if someone intervened, Albert began to die. After his final breath, Queen Victoria reportedly broke down in a scream so loud it echoed through the palace. But what terrified staff wasn't the scream, it was what came next. She locked herself inside the room and had private documents removed before even Albert's body was prepared. When the doctors finally reported the cause of death as several of them avoided eye contact with witnesses. The official announcement felt rehearsed. And then something stranger happened. Within 48 hours of Albert's death, court officials released news that Bertie, the man Albert had been investigating, was to become central to the future stability of the crown. A sudden death, an ambitious heir, a mother burning documents, and a diagnosis that did not match the symptoms. Coincidence? Or the first layer of a royal cover-up? The forbidden letters, what Queen Victoria tried to hide. 3 days after Prince Albert's burial, Queen Victoria summoned a small group of palace aides to her private study. Her face was pale, her eyes red from days of crying. But her voice was steady. She gave them a chilling command. "Bring me all of Albert's correspondence, every letter, every draft." What happened next remained secret for decades. Court archivists were forced to surrender boxes of Albert's private writings, political drafts, coded messages, personal reflections, even letters addressed to foreign leaders. One servant later claimed that Victoria moved with, quote, cold determination, placing each pile into a large iron chest beside her desk. She did not even glance at most of them. She simply fed them into a furnace. Witnesses described the Queen lifting the lid, watching the flames consume Albert's handwriting, tears rolling down her face as she whispered to herself, "No one must see, no one must ever see." Why would she destroy the private papers of a man she adored more than anything? Some historians argue she was protecting his reputation. Others say she feared his political strategies would be misunderstood. But the letters people did manage to save tell another story. One fragment recovered by a historian in the 1920s, a single half-burned sheet, contained these words: "If the truth is revealed, it will end us all." Even more disturbing was what Victoria did with the surviving documents. She sealed them under royal restriction for an unprecedented 100 years. Not even Parliament could access them. What secret could possibly require a century of silence? The only other people aware of the contents were a handful of royal advisors, several of whom died under unusual circumstances in the years following Albert's death. But the biggest mystery was a set of letters Albert sent shortly before he fell ill. These letters were addressed to the Prime Minister, Lord Palmerston, a powerful man who despised Albert's growing influence. Palmerston had allegedly been working behind the scenes to weaken Albert politically. Their rivalry was no secret. Some historians believe Albert was preparing to expose Palmerston's backroom dealings, threatening his career and reputation. And then Albert suddenly died. Not long after, Palmerston rose to even greater political strength, steering the nation through the remaining decade. His power went unchallenged. But there was one final clue, perhaps the most chilling of all. A maid who served the Queen during her grief later confessed that Victoria spent nights whispering into the empty room, "Forgive me, my love. I knew what they were planning. I should have stopped it." If her words were true, Albert's death wasn't an accident. It was a sealed fate. The suspects. Who stood to gain from Albert's death? Prince Albert's death reshaped the future of the British monarchy, and several people benefited in ways that raised serious questions. 1. The Prince of Wales, Bertie, the rebellious heir. Before Albert confronted him, Bertie was on the brink of scandal. His affair with an actress had the entire royal household in panic. Albert warned him that his behavior was the ruin of the monarchy. After Albert's death, Bertie's position transformed overnight. He became the central figure of royal succession, shielded from scrutiny, and later crowned King Edward VII. A father who threatened to disinherit him suddenly disappeared. A kingdom he nearly lost was placed in his hands. Motive: very strong. 2. Lord Palmerston, the political rival. Albert frequently clashed with the Prime Minister over foreign policy. Palmerston believed Albert was meddling in politics and weakening Britain's stance in Europe. Letters suggest Albert was preparing to publicly challenge Palmerston's leadership. Such an act would have humiliated the Prime Minister and potentially ended his career. After Albert died, Palmerston continued his policies uninterrupted. Motive: extremely strong. 3. Foreign powers, especially Prussia. Albert was pushing for diplomatic moves that threatened certain European powers. His death came at a moment perfectly aligned with their political interests. Motive: moderate but plausible. 4. The royal household, inner circle protectors. This is where things get dark. Several high-ranking palace staff members feared Albert's influence over Queen Victoria. They believed he was steering Britain toward reforms that would reduce aristocratic power. Removing him quietly would restore control to traditionalists. Motive: strong. 5. Queen Victoria herself, the most controversial theory. Not for murder, but for covering it up. Her diary entries reveal she suspected foul play, but revealing the truth would have destroyed the monarchy, implicated her own son, and shattered the royal family's public image. So she chose silence. Her actions, burning letters, blocking autopsy, sealing documents, make sense only if she believed revealing the truth would unleash chaos. The legacy. Did Prince Albert die for nothing? After Albert's death, Queen Victoria plunged into a lifelong mourning that shaped her reign. But behind the heavy black dresses and shuttered palace windows was a queen haunted by secrets. Her isolation wasn't only grief, it was guilt. For decades, she refused to allow anyone to speak of Albert's final days. His death became a forbidden topic within the palace. Staff members who asked questions were dismissed. Historians who requested access to records were denied. But the truth has a way of resurfacing. When the royal archives were partially opened in the early 20th century, researchers discovered alarming inconsistencies. Medical reports were altered. Witness accounts were missing. Letters had been cut, rewritten, or destroyed. The timeline of Albert's illness had been edited. The biggest bombshell came in 1931, when a sealed document was opened early due to an administrative error. Inside was a statement from a former royal doctor admitting that Prince Albert's symptoms did not correspond to typhoid. I was instructed not to pursue further examination. This single admission reignited theories of poisoning and possible royal involvement. Today, historians remain divided. Checkmark. Some believe Albert died from a sudden infection. Checkmark. Others believe he was poisoned by political enemies. Checkmark. A third group believes his son's scandal escalated into something far more dangerous. Checkmark. And some argue Victoria covered up the truth to protect the monarchy. But one fact is undeniable. Albert's death changed the course of British history. Bertie eventually became king and led a monarchy defined by luxury, parties, and excess, the opposite of Albert's disciplined moral vision. If Albert had lived, the royal family, and perhaps the British Empire, may have taken a very different path. Instead, we are left with a mystery buried beneath layers of secrecy, burned letters, and a queen's lifelong silence. Prince Albert's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a turning point, one shrouded in shadows. And maybe that was exactly what someone wanted.